It's time to talk music, audio gear, and anything else that crosses our minds. I'm Mark.
And I'm Pizza.
And welcome to the Hurton Audio Podcast. So, in today's episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about ambient jungle, PlayStation jungle / drum and bass. And this is all, there's lots of names for it. It's a subcategory of Vaporwave. And this is all about sort of 2000s and late 90s gaming, soundtrack, gaming visuals. So in the same way that Vaporwave is very much leaning on 90s computers, low poly drum and bass, PlayStation jungle, ambient jungle, they all sort of are doing the same thing. It's all about, say, PlayStation 1, early Nintendo consoles from like the Nintendo 64 to around it, the consoles around it, because it's not sort of, because some people go from PS1 to PS2, some people stick in like a very firm retro area with like the visuals, the style, the references, and it's very interesting subgenre of Vaporwave, and I've come to really like it. Artists like Pizza Hotline, Major Axis, Alpha, XYSM, Sawteeth, all borrowing influence from the original people who actually did some of the soundtracks in the 90s. People like Cold Storage come to mind, who do a lot of work on the Wipeout soundtracks.
And the sort of genre that it's sort of like built upon, aside from Vaporwave and the obvious sort of Vaporwave connotations, is like jungle and drum and bass.
Yeah. So it's very interesting as a genre, because the thing that's really cool for me is I'm a big fan of like these really dated synths and keyboards, and what it sort of does is it sort of smashes like these retro sort of like really cliche pads and keyboards and smashes them into like like techno 303 sort of two-step bass stuff. So it's just really cool, and it's all about very atmospheric, lush digital pads, like sub bass, break beats, almond breaks. It's just all that sort of stuff. So it's a very cool little thing, and there's a lot of people in the scene, but it's also a very small scene from what I gather. Now I'm not an expert. I don't know every single person in the scene. And I've not heard of everybody, but if you wanted to jump in, I'll put a link to a ambient jungle playlist in the description, just to give you like a little bit of an appetite for what this is. And I've also experimented in making an album in this platform, in this genre, called Primitive Polygons, which is really cool as well. So I've really got stuck into it, and there's just a real cool sort of scene to it. And one thing that's really cool about it is that a lot of them on Bandcamp, artists like Golf US and stuff, and Pizza Hotline, they all reference PlayStation box art and gaming box art. Cityman production have Mega Drive cassette cases. So there's lots of like borrowing and reusing and recycling old media in here.
I feel like you can draw a lot of parallels between the low poly stuff and like the early synthwave stuff, because a lot of the, like, if you take the subgenre of synthwave, Outrun, that is basically like re-soundtracking the Outrun game, and it's a lot of it heavily leans on the visuals of the game and the actual feeling of that soundtrack in the game, and then trying to put like a slightly more modern spin on it too. And I feel like if you actually it'd be interesting to see if it actually evolved, like if low poly evolved from like the synthwave stuff, with synthwave technically being vaporwave as well. It's like, it is like an evolution of people saying, well, I think this is really cool, but I didn't grow up in the 80s. I grew up in like the late 90s or early 2000s. So, this is sort of the equivalent of what these guys have been doing, or, these artists have been doing in the past. So I really would have thought that would be the next, like, step, but then it makes you think like forward and thinking, well, are we going to have some sort of subgenre that's all themed around PS4s?
Well, yeah, you could end up. I suppose it all depends on how important the soundtrack was. Obviously, you could have a resurgence of like interest in, say, Xbox 360 online gaming, but the thing is like, what's your angle? That's always the thing when we're talking about like where these genres come from.
Because we've said several times, I think we've said it on this podcast, that we think EDM will make a absolutely huge comeback, like probably next decade, where they literally just take like dubstep and they just do it again, but harder and more aggressive and everything.
Yeah, there seems to be like a 20-year sort of nostalgia cooker for some of these genres. And that's sort of what's really interesting with Vaporwave as a full genre is really strange. And if you don't get it, it seems utterly bizarre. I remember seeing the Greek god in like the synthwave sort of pink and magenta and cyan sort of environment with tiled floors, and going, why is this different to synthwave?
The mall wave mezzanine stuff.
Yeah, and it's strange because I suppose a lot of it is a bit like with synthwave, and a lot of these genres there is a very big visual element.
100%. And the thing is with the visual element is, if you don't get it, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and that is the thing. Like you've got to have the visual accompaniment to it, and the best thing about all these genres, all these internet genres, and the sub-genres of Vaporwave is that each one is very visually stylistic, and you can see a lot of people in the low poly scene. They've got very crude 3D renders. Some people like Sawteeth go for like very crude 3D renders of like Nintendo style characters and Sega style characters by having like very soft round turtles, mushrooms, and all sorts on the front cover.
Yeah.
Other people like Alpha XYSM. I always have to read it because I can never remember what order it is. He's got like or they have got a really sort of like a cold digital landscape that they have that just reminds you of like 90s and 2000s desktops.
Yeah.
And backgrounds. It's just really cool because if you get it, you really get it. And obviously there's a lot of reference like to the original PlayStation controllers and all sorts buried in a lot of the artwork that you see. I just really like it, and I've always liked drum and bass, but not really got into some of the heavier subgenres of drum and bass.
Yeah, I think you was more originally drawn to the liquid stuff, which you do see if you type like low poly drum and bass. A lot of it is like slashed with liquid drum and bass, because I think there is a lot of similarities. It's like it could be like a subgenre of liquid drum and bass as much as Vaporwave. It's probably more the combination of the two.
I think what takes a lot of these, it's a bit like any subgenre. What takes a lot of these songs out of being normal liquid drum and bass isn't like anything to do with the music. It's to do with the song names, the thematics, and the artwork of the full package being pushed in a visual direction. You could take, because a lot of these songs are instrumentals, you could take them, rebrand them, and they would sort of fit in a different genre, of drum and bass. But it's the combination. A bit like with synthwave, synthwave.
It walks very adjacent to pop in some aspects, is what you're saying. Whereas this walks very adjacent to like standard drum and bass, but it's the nuances and the flair that pushes it into being something different.
Yeah,
I think it's like that with a lot of genres. It's the difference between like back when rock music and metal music was starting to like come apart from each other and be their own defined things. It was all about, well, this album has a heavier guitar tone or more kick drums, and it only takes one or two mutations for something to become a new and original idea, really.
Yeah. And it's just very cool. I know I've said that a bunch, but it's hard really to describe a full genre, and just keep going to, because the thing is with low poly stuff, that's the term that I like to call it, is just low poly, because it's easier than saying ambient drum and bass and PlayStation jungle. It's all very long-winded. But is that it's also very, very new. Like a lot of the releases, minus say the original people who scored like the soundtracks, like Cold Storage, and stuff. It is very new. Like a lot of the releases don't date back before 2019 for the most part. A lot of the people I've looked into have all come out from like 2020 onwards. So it's very, very new. And, the other thing you've got to remember with the original Wipeout games and stuff, which is like one of the games that popularized having dance music in gaming. I remember it being, if you look back at the trailers for Wipeout, it's like a really big thing that they've just put like, the Chemical Brothers and stuff on the disc.
It was a bit of a risk, but it was also like a marketing ploy to like tap into a market of people who liked going to these raves and who liked this type of music, and said, well, this game's fast and this music's fast, and it sort of goes together. And, it's meant to be super futuristic, is Wipeout, and it is. I mean, I think it's funny. It's like a lot of genres, like to a certain extent, even though the sounds are dated, it still feels like it's hard to call it old sounding, because a lot of it does sound very still like forward thinking, because it's not, it's so disconnected from the realms of something like classic rock or from folk or country music. You know what I mean? It's not dated like that is dated. It's like, well, they've gone on a completely different direction. I suppose if you've never heard the music and you have no nostalgic association with it, it probably does sound pretty new.
Yeah, 100%. And I was about to say something I've forgotten.
Sorry.
But on like the realms of where can I buy like low poly drum and bass, there's a few labels. There's collections from Sawteeth, who does the Jungle Fatigue compilations, which you can buy on cassette and vinyl and stuff, and that's a great one to like discover a bunch of artists at the same time. Cityman Production, they do a big vaporwave sort of style stuff, but they have some low poly stuff in there from Major Axis and Pizza Hotline, and they've just announced that they're winding down their label, so they're going to have a big sale soon, so be a good time to grab something if you wanted something. Otherwise, it is a bit like a lot of the like really underground genres, where you have to just find people on Bandcamp and see what do they have.
You got to sort of like scope it out and try listening to albums and try people out and think, well, is this the sort of thing I'm looking for or not? And that takes a lot of trial and error, but sometimes you can discover some amazing artists that way.
Yeah, and on the discovering artists point, I've seen a lot of people complaining online about Spotify trying to ditch the related artists or similar artists tab, which is, in all fairness, like a lot of people have said, this is the way I discover new music. Like, how many bands have you discovered from the similar artists tab on something like Apple Music or Spotify? It'd be a real shame if Spotify got rid of that, because it is. We've talked about it a bunch, how hard it is to discover new music. It's not as simple as just putting the radio on and saying, I like every single song that comes on, or looking down a playlist on Spotify on New Music Friday and going, oh, this is all new music and I like all of it. Everybody has a taste, everybody has like a style and melodic preferences and things. You might not even realize that you have a tonal sort of preference with music, but you might find that every song you like, say, accidentally has the same resolve or similar progressions or similar chord type, similar sound design, and you don't realize that until you really start to think about it.
I feel like it's one thing where people like music that has a certain dissonance or a certain modal quality, and they can't quite describe it. Some people use words like twisted or try and describe it with a word that isn't, say, a musical term, and that can be quite interesting because, you know, it's like you know that there's something that appeals to you, but you can't like describe it, and it's very hard to like Google these things, because also if you Google it and you are served like a billion songs that exactly are your preference, then, you know, that's going to be a lot to take in all at once. I think that's how it feels like when you discover a genre like low poly or like synthwave or house or something, and you go, this is all speaking to me, and then you're like, right, well, if I like all of it, how do I sort of, you know, how do I actually catalogue and understand which of these artists stand out to me? Is that something that even matters? Like, for some people, shuffling a playlist of music they like is enough. They don't really have to like the individual artists. But I know we are both very much like, well, who are these artists and what are they doing and what else do they make? And, you know, it's a bit like that with the synthwave stuff, watching some people drift into synthwave and drift back out again. Some people are just synthwave, and, you know, does that affect your view on them?
Yeah, it also depends on how purist you want to be with some of the genres. Like,
Yeah.
I do think some of these genres, you are put into a box with them. In that sense, if you want to be, I suppose it's one of those.
Yeah.
And that's what you sort of see with synthwave a lot, is that people are like, this is the box, but I'm going to stray slightly out of it and walk around it. And then it's like, but is it synthwave?
Well,
though?
there's an idea with these very specific subgenres of there's pushing the boundaries, and then there's just breaking all the boundaries down and walking into a completely different set of boundaries. And I feel like there's been a couple of artists that sort of dip the toes in synthwave, but they're like, well, that's not all I'm going to do. And I think that's like a very creative, and if you're just like making music and you're not trying to do something specific, I think that's a really healthy way of making music. Because I do think that if you try and stay in the box, then limitations can become like a prison in a certain sense. And it's trying to figure out a way to make this style of music where you can sort of expand enough but stay in the like subgenre almost. Or it's like, how do you innovate without completely leaving the realms of this thing that you like? And I suppose that's where the knowledge of the genre and the knowledge of other genres and the musical skill comes in, of saying, right, well, I'm going to put like vocal chops in this. I mean, I think the Midnight have showcased how you can start and become like a central point of a music genre and then push the boundaries really far without sort of leaving that genre, but whilst also really, you know, not staying like firmly planted, if you know what I mean. And I think there's a lot of artists that do that in different genres, but you have to find the artist like in the genres you like that push, but sort of keep the feet grounded to work out what are the sort of lines of a genre and how does that work?
Do you not think that a lot of the time the vocalists push the genres out wider because you get very trapped in a box vocally with some genres, and they want to expand and do different things, you know, because you can't do the same thing all the time.
I think ultimately if you have vocals in a song and you have people writing songs and then placing that song in a box, like a genre box, then yeah, because you might be making a synthwave album and you might write a song and go, well, this song would be better if it had this feeling, because, you know, it's more evocative of this sort of song, like a specific song. Say you're making a genre like synthwave and you go, this would be really, really nice if it went into like a house drop, and then you're like, well, what does that look like on this album? You know, can we like bring a bit of housiness into it? And I do think synthwave and house is not the best example because they do share a lot of similarities in certain respects, but I think that was a more 2010s thing, and now synthwave is just, God knows, it's so expansive. I think that's the interesting thing with something like synthwave, and I'd be very interested to see how that happens with low poly, because low poly seems very uniform at the moment to me. Like there is like a lot of it is like drum and bass tempo, but some of it is like house tempo as well. Like Pizza Hotline does some techno-y stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of them, because it's vaporwave, I know Pizza Hotline Level select is very much one style, not one style all the way through, but the vibe is very much saying this is drum and bass, it's all breakbeats and stuff. His other releases are a lot more vaporwave with different tempos, more vaporwave sort of rhythm sections, and sort of no breakbeats in places at all. So it depends what they're doing, you know. You see, a lot of the low poly artists that I know have very few releases, so you're not really seeing the full arc of like what they're doing or where they're going. You're more just seeing like this is what they're doing at the moment, you know. Some of them have more than others. Some of them draw into more minimal. Some of them are more like video game like. And I always think like the video game like ones have a certain thing to them that I always think like when they're more like sound design and there's less emphasis on the drums just being relentless. I like the music and the tonality of a lot of those ones. Like The Garden by Excelia is really cool for that because it's just very atmospheric. And I think it's almost a perfect genre to listen to with headphones on, because a lot of these songs just spin round and have like big evolving landscapes. A lot of them almost like put you in like a video game level. That's the way they sort of utilize like the sound design.
Yeah, because that I suppose is the ideal medium. It's like this is supposed to be like the soundtrack of a level of a game, each song.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
it's, I suppose when they can do that, they've really like achieved what they set out to do in a way, because that does feel like the end game of the genre. A bit like with a lot of the synthwave stuff being like replacement music for like arcade machines. You know, it is very much like we're trying to place you in a game that you could be, you know, if you've played games like this before, if you played on these consoles back in the day, this is like a nostalgia trip. And I think that's really cool. And I like I sort of alluded to earlier, I'd be very curious to see what stuff gets this nostalgia trip thing, because I think if you're, you know, if you've experienced the thing that you have to be nostalgic for, like actually as it happened, like with synthwave, I didn't, because I didn't grow up in the 80s. So, you know, you're sort of referring to it through a lens of other people's and from popular culture and movies. And you're saying, well, I sort of get it because I know all these reference points and I know how that goes together. But with the PS1 stuff, since we actually like played PS1 a lot when we were kids.
I have the original copy that we bought of Wipeout 3. You know, I still had that. So, I mean, we chucked the PS1, so I did have to buy a new PS1. But we did have a lot of the games left over, which is nice.
But it's like, because you experienced it firsthand, it's got a different sort of association with it, you know. So it'd be really interesting, like you say, if Xbox Live stuff becomes some sort of, I think it is already like popping up online, but like if it became like a music thing or an art thing, a bit like how Vaporwave leans on like the is it Alexander the Great, the statue? I think it is.
Probably, yeah.
Could be. It's one of the statues anyway. But if that Xbox Live becomes that medium, like that reference point for a medium, it would just be so bizarre, because, you know, these things have been the opposite of cool at times. Do you know what I mean? And that's what's so interesting. You know, there's all these subgenres. At one point, these were like the least cool thing, because, you know, they'd been just outdated enough to where somebody would be like, well, why are you playing a PS1 when like the PS2 or PS3's out? But it gets to that point where it becomes desirable, as you've sort of found out.
Yeah, like you'd think a lot of these old retro gaming consoles and games and controllers would be relegated to the 99p bag and bin eBay job lot listings, but they're not. They're a lot of the time more expensive than buying games or controllers or consoles now.
I would say they were relegated to the 99p bin, and all of a sudden, whilst nobody's been looking, that price has been creeping up and up and up. It's a bit like these, like, you know, like the Guitar Hero and Rock Band controllers, where because nobody wanted them and they just took up space, when there was in abundance, there was like, oh, just take them. You know, in game shops. Remember game shops? No, there was just a bucket of them in game.
There is a big rumour that they're coming to PS5 and Series X, Rock Band and Guitar Hero.
They're better.
Guitar Hero specifically.
I really want a new Guitar Hero.
There's a big rumour I saw.
I think that somebody needs to sort it out. I mean, what can they lose? What can they lose by doing it? Nothing, in my opinion. But point being is that there was dirt cheap, and now you go to buy a Rock Band Mustang controller, it's like 300 quid.
The other thing that we're talking about when we talk about game soundtracks, and I think a lot of people, particularly maybe 10, 15 years ago, didn't really realise the value of this. Games, like particularly when you're talking about under 18-year-olds, it's a captive audience. So you give a bunch of essentially children, you say, for Christmas, here is your Wipeout game. It has 10 songs on, and you are going to listen to those 10 songs over and over and over again, and you are not going to have a choice to listen to anything else.
Yeah.
Those songs are going to get stuck in your head. You're going to know every single beat of those songs. And the funny thing is, like, I've seen memes online about 90s drum and bass enjoyers, and it's like 6-year-olds and then druggies in the club because that's, why else would you be listening? It's so strange. You have this full club scene where people, are going and experiencing like night out and nightlife. And then you have like 6-year-olds listening to the same music because it's on Wipeout.
Yeah.
So obviously you've got this like weird cross, but like what better way to advertise a genre?
Yeah, because eventually all them kids are going to grow up and they're going to say, what the hell was that thing that was on Wipeout? I'm going to look it up. And all of a sudden, all these people like this thing.
It's like planting the seed. I think like with Rock Band and Guitar Hero, people in the music industry and the old rock bands who was getting featured on those games didn't really realise how many long-time fans they was going to pick up from those games, because the full point of those games is, I want to play that song because I like it. I don't like that song, so I don't want to play it.
Yeah. So it's all about choice, and you only have a choice of 80 or so songs on some of the, and they're the ones with the big soundtracks. So the point is like you've got to look at that 80 song list and you say,
what do I like?
Well, I like that one a lot better than I like the rest, and then you sort of have to get to know them, and in a way you are like you've got such a limited selection. You have to start liking some of these songs, especially if it's a game that you want to play.
Yeah, 100%. And this is where these So this is where people discover music in a way where they wouldn't have discovered it otherwise, and you can like, I've seen a lot of people online talk about Ridge Racer just as an aesthetic, as a music, as just a style. And Carter Takahashi, Kota, I'm butchering his name.
Try it again.
Kota Takahashi, who does We Rare Type 4. It's not much easier, is it? The album REIWA Type 4. He does the original Ridge Racer Type 4. At least some of the songs on that he does. And he's like one of the people that a lot of people like really like. And aesthetically, his tracks are amazing. But like a lot of people just like Ridge Racer for the music, the gameplay, everything, the full vibe. But like say, it's funny how what you would think like to the companies making the games, the soundtrack is pretty insignificant a lot of the time.
It's just we need music. I feel like that.
Music, put some music in the game.
And I feel like in some of the newer games, it really does feel like that. It feels like there's not a thread, like the music supervisor has just cobbled together whatever on some of these newer games. I won't name any games because some games have, I mean, an example of a game with a clear vision of a soundtrack to me is some of the Forza Horizon games where they have the stations and the stations are like curated and there's a vibe that I hate to use the word vibe, but there's a thing across the board that sort of gives the soundtrack like a glue that makes it make sense. But there is some games where the soundtracks just don't really make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's a bit like FIFA. FIFA just has music and people will live and die by the songs that are on FIFA. You know, they'll know the songs on FIFA. Another game that comes to mind for not needing a really big music soundtrack, but really, really elevating itself on that is Rocket League. Like Monster Cat just looked at Rocket League and went, "We're printing money."
To be honest, Monster Cat know the game because they will. If there's a game that they can put their songs in, they do it. And I am surprised more labels don't do that, because you would think like Sony, Universal and stuff would be like, you have a hookup with some of these games publishers and say whatever you want. I mean, in my opinion, you can't pay for that level of advertising. Like they're trying to make money off these games. These people who are playing these games have no choice but to listen to the songs that are placed on there. So if anything, the songs should be. I mean, I'm surprised they're not fighting to get the songs on these games, because, you know, like you saying, they're a captive audience. If you play a game like Forza, you end up playing it, and there's only so much music they can put in the game realistically without having live stations. So you were going to hear some of these songs, you know, hundreds of times. And, you know, the only way they can do that is with mainstream radio. And the thing is, like, a lot of people just don't listen to radio. I mean, you can thrash a song on, like, the national station or your hits or oldest station, and you can have people who are just never going to hear it because they are not exposed to radio almost at all. So it's like these games are just a perfect platform to throw like these new artists and new songs at like an audience that you can't reach. It's a bit like when they said about all the Taylor Swift fans watching the NFL and was like, oh my God, we can advertise to this audience that we cannot reach no matter what we do. We can't get to this age range and this, you know, this demographic. And now we can by, you know, taking all these beer adverts off the Super Bowl and replacing them with whatever applies to like teenage girls for the most part. That was the demographic they couldn't reach. I remember reading about it.
So on that tangent, that's been an exploration of low poly music, but also just touching on
game soundtracks,
internet genres and subgenres of Vaporwave. A few things I'll say is, like I say, I will link a playlist in the description if you don't know what we're talking about, just to listen to. There is also a little plug here. GHS, it's 15, isn't it?
15.
Yeah. GHS 15 was made revolving around the sounds of low poly and the kits of low poly. So you have very lush sound design specifically designed to use for that purpose. So if anybody wanted to make music and get into this, that's a great way to start. It's really helped me when doing this sort of stuff, because it's just like a palette you can use that we've specifically gone out our way for to get from vintage 2000s synthesizers like the Extreme Lead, the Novation A Station, the Korg TR rack. So it's really good. And also I have got some low poly CDs that are going to be on the Hurton Audio store that are by the artist Mark Drive. Is called Primitive Polygons Demo Disc Edition. If you are interested in getting them, because they're working a PS1 if you have a PS1. So that's it from me. Do you want to add anything else, Peter?
No, just at us if there's any new music genres like this, and we will try and, you know, figure them out and maybe talk about them one time. But I just think that these subgenres are just fascinating. You know, I know we've talked about it for a long time, for like 30 minutes, but it's just how it comes to be is so interesting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what sort of versions of this type of music come out soon.
Right, thanks for listening, everybody. See you next week.